So last week, for those of you who might not know, would have been Edith Wharton's 151st birthday. It's questionable, but I believe her magnum opus is not The House of Mirth, though I love that novel also. But for me, her best novel is The Age of Innocence, that extraordinary, vicious, clairvoyant novel. And it's a particularly precious book to me because my own first novel, The Innocents, is a contemporary recasting of it. Although mine is set in a small suburban Jewish community in northwest London, which is where I grew up. Adam Newman is 28, newly engaged to Rachel, who's his girlfriend of 13 years. And as the novel opens, they are finally beginning to plan this very long-awaited wedding. Their families and their lives are completely intertwined. Adam works for Rachel's father and has been going to the soccer with him since he was a teenager. And everything is safe and comfortable and settled and easy until Rachel's cousin, Ellie, moves home from New York. Ellie's really the antithesis of Rachel. She's younger, she's fiercely independent, she's vulnerable, she's promiscuous, and Adam, who's a little bit self-satisfied and quite pompous, certainly at the beginning of the book, he's very disapproving. But he begins to see that she also offers him a liberation, freedom from all the loving interference and the cozy monotony of northwest London. I won't read for long because I know some of you will have read the book, but I will just read 2 minutes from the beginning just to give you a bit of a feel. Adam had, for the occasion, bought a new suit. He had wavered between dandyish black, chalk-striped and double-breasted, and a more traditional two-button jacket in deep navy wool. After some consideration, he had chosen the navy. It seemed a more appropriate suit for a man who was newly engaged. And now he was in the suit and in synagogue, considering the stained glass windows that painted a dappled light, pale rose and paler sapphire, onto the painted faces in the women's gallery. There were 3 of these windows, a red-flamed golden candelabra for Hanukkah, a rainbow in a cobalt sky with white leaded doves swooping beneath its arch, and a third pane in which acid green palm trees framed the 2 rounded silvery tablets of the Decalogue, an orange and lemon sunburst above them. Beneath this one sat Rachel Gilbert between her mother and her grandmother, looking intently at the pulpit. Adam, in turn, lowered his eyes from the window and looked intently at Rachel. They had been together since they were 16, 12 years last summer. For 12 years she had been his girlfriend, and now, for a week, she had been his fiancée. And it all felt different. He could never have anticipated the shift, profound and inarticulable, that had taken place when he had seen the ring over which he had agonized, winking on Rachel's slender finger. It was more than possession, more than union, more than love. It was absolute confidence. It was certainty and a promise of certainty always. Beside him, Jasper Cohen stirred suddenly, shifting his bulk beneath the folds of his white prayer shawl. Rachel's cousin's here. He nudged Adam in the ribs with a heavy elbow and nodded towards the balcony, where the Gilbert women were ranged, coiffed and contemplative, in a mahogany pew. Rachel's mother, Jaffa Gilbert, sat closest to the rabbi, her cropped and hennaed hair hidden beneath a green hat, red-framed glasses on a red plastic chain resting on the broad velvet shelf of her bosom. Beside her sat Rachel herself, demure in high-necked charcoal silk, looking down at her hands, her face half obscured by a sheet of tumbling dark hair. Rachel's grandmother, Ziva Schneider, was on her other side, peering at the text in her lap with a grimace of either concentration or skepticism. And then the cousin, Ellie Schneider. So? You didn't tell me she was back from New York. I didn't know you cared. If there's going to be a half-naked model in Shul, then I care. Jasper leaned over Adam, straining to see. God, she's tall. You'd need a stepladder to get up there. 6 foot. Too tall for me. You could handle her. Jasper flipped over a few pages of his prayer book without looking at them. When are we going to get hold of that porn film she was in? Shh, said Adam, frowning. It was Art House. He was not the only one frowning, he noticed. Whispered conversation among the men in the back pews was in general permissible, encouraged even, if the content was engaging enough for the surrounding eavesdroppers. Football, in particular, was a much beloved topic. Services on the high holidays were long. It was understood that one had to pass the time. But sustained discussions about porn during Kol Nidre, the beginning of Yom Kippur and a significant spiritual incantation, was pushing lenience to its limit. The congregation was fasting until sunset tomorrow night. In the meantime, they were meant to be atoning. Adam, too, had seen clips of Ellie Schneider's acting debut on the internet. In one, she was delivering a hypnotically rhythmic monologue to the camera, wearing only a Columbia University t-shirt. Synagogue was not a place in which he felt comfortable recalling it. Around them, the Al-Khait prayer continued. For the sin we have committed before you by improper thoughts. For the sin we have committed before you through speech. Pardon us, forgive us, atone for us. Adam rejected the memory with some effort and instead focused on the women's gallery, hoping to catch Rachel's attention. She looked down at him and widened her eyes. From her expression, he could see that she had a great deal to say and was desperate to say it. Her cousin was embarrassing her. She could not believe that Ellie was in shul at all, let alone that the girl had come to Kol Nidre exposing skin from clavicle to navel, wearing a tuxedo jacket with nothing beneath it, and black trousers that clung and shimmered as if she'd been dipped in crude oil. Adam needed little more than a glance to understand Rachel's signalling, for the subtle contraction of her lips and the arching of her dark brows were a language long mastered. He knew their vocabulary and every expression of her lovely face. He did not see the appeal of unpredictable women. Rachel never surprised him, and he considered it a testament to their intimacy that he could predict her reactions with complete confidence. Life, he knew, provided enough of the unexpected. Adam had perspective. A steady and loyal co-pilot was more important than whatever passing frisson might come with more spontaneous spirits. He smiled at her. So that's just a little bit from the opening scene. To recast one of the most beloved American classics is a tall order, and I would never have set out to do anything so presumptuous. And to do justice to my own community, to write a loving, nuanced, honest, clear-eyed portrait. It was something I always wanted to write, but I thought it might take me another 20 years to summon the bravery to do it. But various factors collided, and once this idea had taken up residence in my mind, it became impossible to dislodge, and I really could no longer imagine writing anything else. I could just see the book so clearly. I think the catalyst for The Innocents was not just an urge to retell a story. It was the moment that I realized that the scaffolding of Wharton's novel really provides the perfect foundation for exploring questions of my own that I had long been considering. And of course, some of these questions resonated with the issues that Wharton herself had been examining, but others were just my own preoccupations. And I think once I realized that, I really understood that it wouldn't just be a facsimile, but would be a live contemporary novel with a classic novel woven into its foundations. To give you a little bit of sort of context, there are very few Jews in England. We're about 1/3%. We're very noisy, so it feels like there's more of us, but it's really a tiny community. And so North London, which is one of the largest communities, is quite tight-knit. Obviously, you know, we have, there are Jewish communities there right across the spectrum from Reform to Neturei Karta, but the world that I'm describing is not particularly religious, but sturdily traditional, sort of politically very liberal and socially still quite conservative. From what little I know, it seems kind of a bit like the Westchester, kind of the Jewish Westchester suburbs of New York, but it isn't really a good comparison because the scale is just so different. It makes for a very different environment. It's a wonderful place to grow up. It's very, very warm, and just a tiny bit claustrophobic. Everyone knows everyone. And I had lived there most of my life, give or take some periods of time back in America, and it's a place of which I'm enormously fond. But about 5 years ago, when turning 30 was imminent, the claustrophobia began to outweigh its virtues. I think at that stage, I hadn't yet married. I was turning 30. There was sort of a lot of eyebrows being raised. You're kind of meant to be settled by then. So I decided then to make a little bit of breathing space for myself, and I moved to New York. where of course there are no Jews at all. When I got here, I did really what I always do when I'm in a new place, and I began to read about where I was. I sat in Washington Square and I read Henry James. I made a pilgrimage to Grace Church on Broadway, where Edith Wharton's characters had married. And one day I reached the age of innocence, and there's that first sweeping scene where at the Academy of Music, where the whole of high society has gathered to hear Faust sung. And just as Christine Nielsen, the soprano, is reaching sort of really the climactic aria, the entire audience is sort of ignoring what's happening on stage, and they're just much more interested in one another, in who's there and who's getting married, and in what they're wearing and who they're sleeping with. And I just thought, I've been here. This is just like my synagogue on the High Holy Days. I think, in truth, what I recognized powerfully was something in the social climate of that novel. It had the sort of complex and subtle social code, whose principles actually, I think, could have placed it probably anywhere, any small town, any religious community, anywhere where people live very closely interwoven lives. And it really provided, Wharton's novel really provided the perfect vehicle to explore the choices and the dilemmas that I think face most people coming of age, actually, sort of conformity versus freedom, whether to sacrifice some of the support and the security of a very close, very supportive family in exchange for a little bit more independence. But my message is slightly different from the Wharton novel. The Age of Innocence is a more muted and a more forgiving novel than either The House of Mirth or The Custom of the Country, or actually a great deal that she wrote. But it nonetheless, and it's a very nostalgic novel in some ways, but it's also a revenge on this society that she felt had stifled her as a writer and as a woman, and had contributed to her own loneliness at various points. And I take quite a different position on the world that I describe. I see, I think, a great deal more of its values and its strengths. And of course, I also see the foibles and the weaknesses of that world too. But what I borrowed was really a beautiful structure to explore questions of my own. I think there were really probably two central ideas that I was exploring. I think the first is a pretty universal, actually. How do we each distinguish our own paths from family pressures and expectations? And how, if you grow up wanting to be a good son, a good husband, a responsible part of a community, how can you tell the difference between what you want for yourself and what's being wanted for you? And sometimes those things can be exactly the same, but it takes a little space to figure that out. And the second was a related and probably equally unanswerable question, which is, what makes a good marriage? Is it passion or is it friendship? Is one person alone enough, or when making a decision, do you consider the extended network of others that they offer and the life of which they're a part? I think contemporary romantic law suggests now that you choose a life partner as an individual in a vacuum, really, that one person alone should be the source of all happiness, regardless of context and circumstance. And of course, at the other end of the spectrum is the argument for absolute pragmatism, for arranged marriages, for marriages of convenience. But between the two, there is a vast and quite complex landscape, because one doesn't, in reality, live in a vacuum. And everyone brings with them into a marriage a constellation of factors. They bring their family, their culture, their interests, their financial circumstances, their ambitions, their personal history. And it seems sort of disingenuous to suggest that none of those things contribute in the slightest to one's overall compatibility and happiness. My hero, or my protagonist, Adam, is really struggling with all of these, with sort of all of these questions. The two women in the book, Ellie and Rachel, are not just two very different human beings, but they really offer him two completely different lives. And so he has a pretty impossible choice to make. Thank you so much. I don't know whether, are we doing questions or? The National Jewish Book Award is just, I got this phone call and I don't think I could really believe it. And then I went online and looked at the past winners. I mean, Saul Bellow, Philip Roth, A.B. Yehoshua Aaron Appelfeld, I kind of thought someone had made a terrible mistake somewhere, but it's not a mistake I intend to get corrected. So, yeah, it's amazing. It's such a joy, really. It's a great honor.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Besides the three main characters, was anybody else in the book derived from your personal experiences, or your grandmother, or any of the other characters?
Well, none of the characters, I mean, it's very much fiction, so none of the characters are derived from my personal experience in the sense that they're not based on anyone I know. But I would say that probably, most of I think, certainly I can't speak for all writers, but for me, I think that, there has to be an animating shard of you in every character that you write. Either they embody something of yours, or they're something that you could never be, or, and I know this world very well that the book is based in, and so I know a lot of the characters who embody that world. So there's a lot of people who are in this novel who are familiar to me, but not based on individuals, no.
I'm curious about your process. Once you kind of start coming up with the characters, I'm curious kind of how you do it from there. Are you someone who has Post-it notes all over a board, or do you keep notebooks?
I don't actually keep notebooks. Most writers I know do, but I tend to I'm much more disorganized than that. I write things down a lot, but there are always lots of places that I then immediately lose. So I don't quite know what the point of the exercise is. I like to be really, I think maybe because I'm a little bit disorganized, I really like to have a plan and a map when I start to write. I'm very conscious of not wanting to write down a dead end. So I like to have a map of where I'm going and a plan of the whole piece, really, before I start. And then, of course, it never goes exactly the way that you think it will, but at least you have a guideline to kind of come back to if things steer off course.
Do the characters grow as you are writing, or do you have a clear plan?
Yeah, I think, one has an idea of who these people might be, and then over time through writing, certainly for me, I got to know them much better, and I learned things about them that perhaps I hadn't known would be there, or I hadn't intended to be there, but they told me once I kind of had spent more time with them exactly what was right. And that was certainly true of the ending. I was very open to this kind of going anywhere it needed to be. I was not wedded to having the arc of the story be identical to the Edith Wharton, and I really explored everything from I'm very aware that not everyone's read the book, so I won't give anything away, but I really explored everything from being a completely faithful ending to something that was completely different, and everything in between. And the ending that I ended up with was the one that would be true for these people. It wasn't really even a decision I made. By the time I was writing that point of the book, I knew them and I knew what would happen. It kind of almost wasn't a decision.
Hi, I know you said that you didn't base the characters on anyone in particular, but I'm wondering how your local synagogue at home and your local community received the book. Did they feel that you had written about them? Were they critical, happy? What was their response?
I was interested to see how it would be received. I wasn't completely certain that everyone would be thrilled about this book. British Jews tend to keep their head below the parapet. They don't tend to sort of draw attention to themselves, and this is a novel squarely set in a community in northwest London. But the response has been really, really positive. I mean, I think the thing is people feel and they know that this is written from such a position of warmth. You know, this is a world I know very well and care very much about. And it's an honest portrait. I think people feel that I've been fair. I mean, it's all communities, every community in the world has elements of the ridiculous. I haven't whitewashed anything, but equally, I mean, I'm not really airing dirty laundry because there's nothing in this book but people being people. It's a human story that could happen anywhere. So that was something, I mean, an alteration that, you know, there's a sort of, for anyone who's familiar with the Age of Innocence, there's a financial scandal in that book. That is really a sort of terrifying. She was really clairvoyant, Edith Wharton, because it's pretty much the Bernie Madoff scandal happens in that book. And I was very conscious writing my novel that if I was going to use elements of that story in my book, I was not going to write a Jewish character stealing money. That was not a helpful portrayal. So it's not theft in my book. That was a very clear change that I made not because, you know, Jews don't sometimes steal money, because all people sometimes do bad things from all worlds, but that wasn't an image I wanted to add any ballast to. So I was careful and I think quite gentle to the world that I portray, and so far it's been a really lovely reception, and I think people feel quite proud and quite sort of proprietorial of the novel, which is really nice.
I'm curious how it was growing up as a budding author, having a father who is an author.
I think it was pretty amazing to grow up. My father was a writer, my mother is an editor, and it was very much a family in which books were very precious and reading was valued hugely, and that I think is nothing but an asset. I grew up to really value a beautiful sentence, and that was something that I get completely from my parents. And so I think it was, I don't know, I don't know who I would be had I been raised in a different family. It's kind of an impossible exercise, but I'm certainly sure that I am a writer because of my family.
So I'm just curious to know if you have any feelings about Zadie Smith's book, about so much the same part of the city and...
Well, it's interesting. I don't know if anyone has read NW, the Zadie Smith book, and my novel. I mean, they are geographically a mile apart, a mile and a half. That's London. It's a fascinating place. It's two completely different. It's not just different worlds. It's different planets. I think she's I think On Beauty is one of my favorite novels. I think Zadie Smith's a fantastic writer. But it's very interesting to even put those two novels together, because of course they are set in both squarely North London novels, both faithful North London novels, but completely different communities, completely different experiences. It's interesting. I mean, that's kind of a big city for you.
The Innocents is a sort of storytelling that begs for a film or television adaptation. Any plans in the works?
Yes, actually. There's a very lovely television production company in the UK called Carnival, who have just, they make Downton Abbey, so they're a nice company to be with, and they've optioned it for television. So we'll see. It's happening. I think they're doing stuff. I'm not really completely involved, but things are moving, so we'll see.
I know you didn't want to talk about your new project, but is there any lessons learned from the current writing project that you would take to the next?
I think the thing about this job, or probably most jobs, but I hope I always learn from what I'm writing. You have to kind of evolve, and you learn on the job. I think writers probably do their best work in their 50s and 60s. So I hope I've learned writing this, and I've got better at editing, and better at knowing when things should, when something's right and I should go with it, and better at knowing when something should go in the trash. I don't know. I think you probably just have to grow into the job and just keep at it. I just hope I have the opportunity to keep writing and keep improving as I go.
Also, I know that when you leave us today, you're going to the airport. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing tomorrow?
It's a little bit of a busy week. I'm flying to London tonight on the red eye, because tomorrow night is the Costa Book Awards in London, and I won the Costa First Novel Award, so I'm going back to London to accept an award there, which is lovely. And then the next day I'm flying back to Boston to give a talk there, so just a flying visit.
Any other questions? Then we just want to thank you so much. It's just an honor to have you here. Thank you, and congratulations.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM. To GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.